The final crescendo of the aria shattered through Lavinia's unconsciousness, like glass breaking against stone. She gasped awake, her body betraying her with a violent jolt that sent her heart slamming against her ribs. For 3 terrible seconds, she had no idea where she was. The world was darkness and warmth, and the lingering ghost of a dream she couldn't remember. Her cheek pressed against something solid, fine linen carrying the subtle scent of sandalwood and night air, and something distinctly masculine that made her stomach drop before her mind caught up. Then reality crashed through. She was in a theater box at the Royal Opera House, and she had been sleeping against the shoulder of a man she had never seen before. Lavinia wrenched herself upright so quickly that her vision swam. The borrowed hairpins in her elaborate coiffure shifted dangerously, and she felt one slide free, tumbling into the shadows beneath her seat. Her face burned with heat so intense she was certain it must be visible even in the dim candlelight. Around them, the audience was rising. 1,000 rustling skirts and murmured conversations created a wall of sound, pressing against her ears. But louder than all of it was the thundering of her own pulse, the mortifying awareness that people were looking, not at the stage, not at the performers taking their bows, at her. The stranger beside her did not move. He sat with the stillness of a man carved from marble, his posture rigid in a way that suggested he had been aware of her weight against him for quite some time. His hands rested on his thighs, gloved fingers perfectly relaxed. He did not turn to look at her. Lavinia's voice emerged as barely more than a croak. Pillow during the 3rd act? His voice pillow during the 3rd act? His voice was low, precise, utterly devoid of warmth. Or to snore through what critics are calling the finest performance of La Traviata in a decade. Horror flooded through her. I do not snore. You do. He finally turned to look at her, and Lavinia felt the air leave her lungs. He was younger than she'd expected, perhaps 32 or 33, with dark hair swept back from a face that would have been arrestingly handsome if not for the frost in his gray eyes. There was something severe in the cut of his jaw, something unyielding in the set of his shoulders. He looked at her the way one might examine an unexpected insect on one's dinner plate. Softly, I'll grant you, but unmistakably. Lavinia wanted to sink through the floor, through the building's foundation. Seats beside her, which should have held seats beside her, which should have held Phineas Locke and his promised chaperone, were conspicuously vacant. Only 2 crystal glasses remained, one empty, one untouched, and a program folded into precise thirds. The gentleman who escorted you here. The stranger's eyebrow lifted fractionally. He departed approximately 40 minutes ago, shortly after you fell asleep. Departed? The word came out strangled. What do you mean, departed? I mean, he stood, collected his belongings, and walked out of this box without so much as a backward glance at the woman he'd abandoned. A note of dark amusement entered his voice. I confess, I found the display rather fascinating, almost theatrical enough to rival what was occurring on stage. Lavinia's mind raced. Phineas had left her, but he'd promised Oliver this would be simple. Sit in the box, enjoy the opera, maintain silence, go home. Her brother had sworn that Phineas's friend simply needed someone presentable for the evening, someone to fill an empty seat. Oliver had even helped her select this gown, deep burgundy silk that had belonged to their mother before the money ran out, hastily altered to match current fashion. No one had mentioned anything about being abandoned. No one had mentioned anything about a stranger with eyes like winter storms. I should go, she said, rising too quickly. Her ankle turned on her borrowed heels, and she steadied herself against the velvet-lined wall. I apologize again for the imposition. I'm afraid that's no longer possible. His words stopped her cold. I beg your pardon? The stranger rose with fluid grace, adjusting his cuffs with deliberate precision. He was tall, taller than she'd realized, and when he moved to stand between her and the exit, she became acutely aware of how small the box felt, how trapped she was. "Look there," he said quietly, gesturing toward the opposite tier of boxes. Against her better judgment, Lavinia followed his gaze. Across the glittering expanse of the theater, faces turned in their direction. Women in diamonds leaning together, fans fluttering with barely concealed excitement. An older woman in sapphires had an opera glass raised directly toward them, making no attempt to hide her scrutiny. "They've been watching for nearly an hour," the stranger continued. "Watching you sleep against my shoulder, with what I can only describe as ravenous curiosity. By now, half of London's most dedicated gossips have formed their own conclusions about who you are and what you mean to me." Lavinia's blood turned to ice. "But I don't mean anything to you. We've never met." "That," he said, something shifting in those gray eyes, "is precisely the problem, and precisely the opportunity." "Opportunity?" she repeated. "What are you?" The curtain to their box swept aside, and Lavinia understood, with terrible clarity, that she was no longer in control of anything that happened next. 3 women entered the box in a cascade of silk and predatory smiles. The first was young, perhaps 19, with golden ringlets and a gown of pale pink that probably cost more than Lavinia's family earned in a year. She moved with the confidence of someone who had never been denied anything, her blue eyes sharp despite her cherubic features. Behind her came an older woman, draped in enough emeralds to make a queen envious, her face pinched with perpetual judgment. And behind her, 2 more society matrons, whose collective scrutiny felt like being examined under a magnifying glass. "Your Grace." The young woman in pink dropped into a curtsy. "What a delightful surprise to find you here this evening." "Your Grace." The words detonated in Lavinia's mind like cannon fire. Your Grace. Your Grace. The form of address reserved for dukes, only dukes. This man, whose shoulder she had been sleeping on for the better part of an hour, was not simply wealthy or well-connected. He was a duke. She had been unconscious against the shoulder of a duke. Lavinia's knees threatened to buckle. Only sheer force of will kept her upright. The duke inclined his head with distant, "Danon offen on tornam." Sinuban tomanto. Steninin diotort bona batendon stono bapobapobon diabobapondopoinern tubabata. Trukedo inclined his head with distant courtesy. "Mrs. Drummond. Ladies." "I had not anticipated company." "Nor had we anticipated yours," Lady Clarissa replied, her gaze sliding to Lavinia with lazy precision. "I don't believe I've had the pleasure." "Miss." The pause hung like a blade waiting to fall. Lavinia opened her mouth, though she had no idea what to say. "The truth? I'm no one. I'm a merchant's daughter from Cheapside, who was tricked into coming here by her brother's scheming friend, and I've just committed social suicide by falling asleep on a duke." But before she could speak, the duke's hand came to rest at the small of her back. The touch was light, barely there through the layers of silk and corsetry, but it sent an electric shock through her body. She went rigid, certain everyone could see the gesture, certain they could read the confusion written across her face. "May I present Miss Lavinia Castellan," the Duke said, his voice carrying easy authority. "A dear friend of my sister's from their time together in Bath. Miss Castellan, this is Lady Clarissa Pemberton, daughter of the Earl of Whitmore, and Mrs. Drummond." The lie was so smooth, so utterly convincing, that for a moment even Lavinia almost believed it. She had never been to Bath. She didn't know the Duke had a sister. She didn't even know the Duke's name. But she heard herself curtsy, heard her own voice emerge with careful diction. "How lovely to make your acquaintance." Lady Clarissa's expression flickered, suspicion warring with social obligation. "Castellan. I don't believe I'm familiar with the family." "Miss Castellan's people are from the north," the Duke said dismissively. "Her mother was a Thornbury before her marriage. You wouldn't have encountered them in London circles." Another lie. Lavinia's mother had been a seamstress's daughter, who married a merchant for love and never regretted it, even when the money disappeared and the fine house had to be sold. But she kept her face neutral and prayed no one could hear her racing pulse. "How charming." Mrs. Drummond spoke with the particular inflection of someone who found nothing charming at all. "And did you enjoy the performance, Miss Castellan?" "I slept through half of it," Lavinia thought wildly. "The soprano was transcendent," she said instead. "Though I confess the journey to London was rather taxing. I fear I may have missed some subtleties of the second act." The Duke's hand pressed slightly more firmly against her back. Approval, she decided. "Travel can be so exhausting," Lady Clarissa agreed, her smile sharp enough to cut glass. "Though I must say, Your Grace, I'm surprised you didn't mention bringing a guest. When we discussed the opera last week, you gave no indication you'd have company." "Plans change," the Duke replied. "I'm certain you understand." The temperature in the box plummeted. Lavinia could feel the undercurrent swirling. Jealousy, suspicion, the complex social maneuvering of people raised to treat conversation as warfare. Lady Clarissa clearly believed she had some claim on the Duke's attention, and Lavinia's presence had disrupted whatever arrangement existed between them. "Well," Mrs. Drummond broke the tension with brittle cheerfulness, "I'm certain we'll be seeing much more of you, Miss Castellan. Will you be attending the Hartwell Ball?" Lavinia had never heard of the Hartwell Ball. She had never attended any ball at all. "Miss Castellan will be staying at Ashworth House for the remainder of the season," the Duke said before she could respond. "As my sister's guest, I'm certain she'll attend all the usual events." The world tilted sideways. Ashworth House, the remainder of the season, all the usual events. He was claiming her, publicly, irrevocably, in front of witnesses who would spread this story to every drawing room in London before breakfast. "How wonderful," Lady Clarissa said, her voice brittle as frozen glass. "I look forward to becoming much better acquainted." She swept from the box, the other women following. Only when the curtain fell back into place did Lavinia allow herself to breathe. "What?" she said slowly, turning to face the Duke. "Have you just done?" His expression remained unreadable. "I believe I've just introduced you to society." "You've just lied to society. You told them I'm staying at your house. You said I'm friends with your sister." She shook her head. "I don't even know your name." "Hadrian Vance, Duke of Ashworth." He said it as if she should have known. "And yes, I told them you'll be staying at Ashworth House, because that's precisely what you're going to do." "I most certainly am not." "Did Mr. Locke not explain the arrangement?" Lavinia stared at him. "What arrangement?" "He said his friend needed someone to accompany him to the opera. That's all. He said I should sit quietly, and he would pay me 3 guineas for my time." 3 guineas. That's what he told you. That's what he paid me. Half in advance. Her chin lifted. "It was meant to be simple. A few hours of silence, then I could go home. I'm afraid pretending is no longer an option." The Duke moved to the edge of the box. "Mr. Locke was meant to bring me someone suitable for a specific purpose. Someone intelligent enough to navigate society, unknown enough to disappear when the charade was no longer necessary, and desperate enough to accept terms without asking questions." "Desperate?" Lavinia's voice sharpened. His word. Not mine. The Duke turned back, and for the first time, she saw something other than frost in his eyes. Something almost like respect. "You've handled the last 10 minutes with remarkable composure. Most women would have fainted, or fled, or confessed everything out of sheer panic. I considered all three. But you didn't choose any of them. You played the role and improvised admirably. He studied her with unnerving intensity. That's precisely the quality I require. The quality you require for what? He was silent for a long moment. I need someone to help me escape a trap, and in exchange, I'm prepared to change your entire life. The curtain swept aside again before Lavinia could demand an explanation. This time, it was not society matrons who entered, but a young woman who burst into the box with the energy of a summer storm. She was perhaps 20, dark-haired like the Duke, with warm brown eyes sparkling with excitement. Her gown was cheerful primrose yellow, and she was already speaking before the curtain closed behind her. "Hadrian, you absolute genius." She grabbed both of Lavinia's hands. "Is this her? The one everyone's whispering about? You've set the gossip mill spinning faster than I've seen in years. This is brilliant." "Phoebe," the Duke said warningly. "Don't Phoebe me in that tone. I've been watching from the Whitmore box, and the look on Clarissa's face when she left was worth every tedious evening I've spent listening to her simper about wedding breakfasts." She turned back to Lavinia with an eager smile. "You must be utterly terrified. But please don't be. This is going to be wonderful." "Lady Phoebe," Lavinia extracted her hands gently. "I'm afraid there's been some misunderstanding." "She doesn't know," the Duke interrupted quietly. Phoebe's eyebrows shot up. "She doesn't know? I thought Mr. Locke was supposed to explain everything." "Mr. Locke absconded 40 minutes into the performance with whatever advance I paid him, leaving Miss Castellan alone in my box without explanation." "That weasel!" Phoebe's cheerful demeanor vanished. "I never liked him. I told you not to trust him." "You were right. You may gloat later. For now, we need to explain the situation before Miss Castellan decides I'm a madman and flees." "I haven't ruled out that possibility," Lavinia said. Phoebe laughed, a genuine, delighted sound. "Oh, I like her already. Sit, please. Let us explain everything." They sat in the velvet-lined chairs while the theater emptied below. Lavinia kept her hands folded in her lap, aware that her borrowed gloves were slightly too large, and her borrowed gown was several seasons out of fashion. "Our grandmother," Phoebe began, "is the Dowager Duchess of Ashworth. She is also the most stubborn, most relentless woman in all of England." "Phoebe," the Duke cautioned, "it's true. She decided 8 months ago, after our father died, that Hadrian must marry immediately. Not eventually. Immediately." Phoebe's voice carried both affection and frustration. "She's been throwing eligible women at him ever since. Lady Clarissa is her current favorite. And Lady Clarissa," Lavinia said slowly, "believes she has an understanding with the Duke." "Lady Clarissa believes she'll be a duchess by Christmas," Phoebe confirmed, "because our grandmother has all but promised it. They've discussed settlements. They've discussed the wedding breakfast." Lavinia looked at the Duke. "And you don't want to marry her?" "I don't want to marry anyone." The words came out flat. "Not Lady Clarissa. Not any of the women my grandmother parades before me. Not yet. Perhaps not ever." "Then tell her that." "I have, repeatedly." A muscle tightened in his jaw. "But my grandmother doesn't accept refusal. She simply finds new angles of attack. She believes she knows what's best for the family, and she won't relent until I've capitulated or found a way to make capitulation impossible." "That's where you come in," Phoebe said eagerly. "Tonight, you fell asleep on his shoulder in front of half the ton. By tomorrow, everyone will be speculating about who you are and what you mean to him. If you agree to stay at Ashworth House, to attend events as his apparent interest, he can claim he's courting me instead," Lavinia finished, "making it impossible for your grandmother to force a match with Lady Clarissa." "Exactly. And at the end of the season, you simply decide you don't suit. Part ways amicably. No harm done. Except to my reputation, Lavinia said quietly. The box fell silent. The Duke and his sister exchanged a glance. When the Duke spoke again, his voice had lost some of its calculated edge. Your reputation will be protected. I give you my word. You'll be presented as my sister's guest. When we end the association, it will be portrayed as a mutual decision. No scandal will attach to your name. And if your grandmother investigates my background, if Lady Clarissa decides to look into who I really am, let them look, Phoebe said fiercely. You're a gentlewoman who's fallen on hard times. It happens. It's not scandalous. It's sympathetic. And if anyone dares speak ill of you, they'll answer to me. Lavinia wanted to laugh at the absurdity. This morning, she had been helping her mother with mending, calculating whether they could afford coal for another week. Now she was sitting in a Duke's opera box, discussing fake courtships like it was the most natural thing in the world. Why me? She asked. Surely there are dozens of women who would leap at this opportunity. The Duke was silent for a long moment. Then, because you fell asleep. I beg your pardon. You fell asleep. In my box during the opera, surrounded by people who would have given anything for a moment of my attention. You didn't simper at me. You didn't angle for an introduction. You simply fell asleep. I was exhausted, Lavinia said defensively. I walked 3 miles to get here because I couldn't afford a hackney, and I've barely slept in a week because my mother's been ill. She stopped, horrified at how much she'd revealed. Precisely. The Duke's voice softened. You're not here to trap me. You're not here to manipulate the situation. You're here because your brother's friend made you a promise and then broke it. And now you're trying to survive with whatever dignity you can muster. He leaned forward, and Lavinia became aware of how close he was, how the candlelight caught the sharp planes of his face. I'm offering you more than survival, Miss Castellan. 3 months in a world you've never accessed, wearing gowns you've never dreamed of. And at the end, references and connections that could secure you a position in any great house in England. Lavinia's throat tightened. It was everything she'd ever wanted, and nothing she'd ever allowed herself to hope for. 3 conditions, she heard herself say. The Duke's eyebrow rose. You're negotiating with me. You need me as much as I need this opportunity. That makes us equals, Your Grace. Phoebe made a delighted sound. Something flickered in the Duke's eyes. Interest, perhaps. Name your conditions. Lavinia straightened her spine. First, my family must be informed properly. Not by Mr. Locke. I want a letter sent to my mother explaining that I've accepted a position as Lady Phoebe's companion. Nothing about courtships or arrangements. Done. Second, when this ends, I want references. Real ones. Letters of introduction to help me secure a position as a governess or companion. That's more difficult, the Duke said slowly. References for a fake courtship? Not from you, Lavinia interrupted. From Lady Phoebe. From anyone in society she can vouch for. Phoebe nodded eagerly. I'll introduce you to everyone I know. By the end of the season, you'll have your pick of situations. And your third condition? The Duke asked. Lavinia met his eyes directly. The moment you decide to marry someone, whether it's Lady Clarissa or anyone else, this ends immediately. I won't be used as a shield while you conduct a real courtship behind my back. I may be poor, Your Grace, but I won't be made a fool. The silence stretched between them. Then, slowly, the Duke extended his hand. You have my word. All 3 conditions accepted. Do we have an agreement, Miss Castellan? Lavinia looked at his outstretched hand. Elegant, powerful, belonging to a world she had never imagined entering. She looked at Phoebe, practically vibrating with hope. She thought of her mother, bent over mending by candlelight. Her father, hollow-eyed and silent since they lost everything. She thought of 3 months of security, 3 months to prove she could be more than a merchant's daughter fallen on hard times. She took his hand. "We have an agreement." His grip was firm and warm, sealing a bargain that would change everything. She just didn't know yet how much. The carriage ride to Ashworth House passed in a blur of shadows and street lamps. Phoebe filled the silence with cheerful chatter, plans for dress fittings, lists of events, names Lavinia would need to remember. The Duke sat opposite, his gaze fixed on the darkened streets, his expression unreadable. Occasionally, his eyes would flick to Lavinia, assessing, before returning to the window. She should have been terrified. She was terrified. But beneath the fear ran something else, a current of wild, irrational hope. "You'll need everything," Phoebe was saying. "Morning dresses, afternoon gowns, evening wear, at least 4 ball gowns. No, 5. Phoebe." The Duke's voice cut through. "Perhaps allow Miss Castellan a moment to breathe." "She can breathe while we plan." But Phoebe softened, squeezing Lavinia's hand. "I'm sorry. I'm overwhelming you. It's just, this house has been so gloomy since Father died. Grandmother's constant lectures. Hadrian locked away for hours on end. Having someone new here feels like hope." The word landed in Lavinia's chest with unexpected weight. When the carriage stopped, she pressed her gloved hand against the window to confirm what she was seeing. Ashworth House was not simply large, it was palatial. A cream-colored facade stretched across an entire block, punctuated by columns, and enormous windows glowing with warm light. Stone lions flanked the entrance, watching impassively as footmen in crimson livery materialized to open carriage doors. Lavinia stepped down onto the cobblestones and felt for one dizzying moment like she had crossed into another world entirely. Inside was even more overwhelming. Marble floors gleamed beneath crystal chandeliers, scattering rainbow fragments across the walls. A sweeping staircase curved upward into shadows. Portraits of stern-faced Vance ancestors lined the walls, their painted eyes following her with collective disapproval. "You don't belong here," they seemed to say. "You never will." "The blue guest suite," the Duke told the housekeeper, a tall woman with silver-streaked hair and sharp dark eyes. "Have it prepared for Miss Castellan immediately. She'll require a lady's maid. Someone discreet. Of course, Your Grace." The housekeeper, Mrs. Blackwood, inclined her head. Her gaze swept over Lavinia with professional assessment, taking in the borrowed gown, the slightly too large gloves. Whatever conclusions she drew, she kept them hidden behind perfect neutrality. "This way, miss." Lavinia turned back to the Duke and his sister, uncertain. "Rest tonight," the Duke said. "Tomorrow will be eventful." It was not reassuring. Phoebe pulled her into an impulsive embrace. "It's going to be wonderful," she whispered. "You'll see." Then Lavinia was following Mrs. Blackwood up the sweeping staircase, her footsteps swallowed by thick carpet, her pulse racing with every step. The blue guest suite was larger than her family's entire house. She stopped in the doorway, unable to move further. A 4-poster bed dominated one wall, draped in silk hangings the color of a summer sky. A marble fireplace crackled with warmth. An elegant writing desk sat before a window overlooking an extensive garden, silver-touched by moonlight. There was a settee, 2 armchairs, a wardrobe large enough to house a small family, and through an open doorway, a private sitting room with its own hearth. This was where servants put guests. If this was modest by Ashworth standards, Lavinia couldn't begin to imagine what the family's own chambers looked like. "I'll send Marin up shortly," Mrs. Blackwood said. "She'll serve as your lady's maid. Is there anything else you require, Miss Castellan?" "No, thank you." The housekeeper departed, and Lavinia was alone. She walked into the room, trailing her fingers along the silk bedspread, the polished desk, the cool marble of the mantelpiece. Everything was exquisite. Everything was foreign. Everything belonged to someone else. What have I done? Tomorrow, she would face the Dowager Duchess. Tomorrow, she would have to continue this charade in daylight, among people trained from birth to detect weakness. A soft knock interrupted her spiraling thoughts. "Miss?" A young woman appeared, perhaps 18, with copper hair pinned beneath a neat cap and kind eyes. She carried a tray with tea and small sandwiches. "I'm Marin. Mrs. Blackwood assigned me to you. I thought you might be hungry." The simple kindness nearly undid her. "Thank you," Lavinia said, her voice rougher than intended. "That's very thoughtful." Marin set about preparing the room with quiet efficiency, laying out a nightgown, turning down the bed, banking the fire. She didn't ask questions, didn't pry. "Is there anything else you need, miss?" Marin asked when she'd finished. "Only sleep, I think." "Then I'll wake you at 8. Lady Phoebe takes breakfast at 9. And the Dowager—" Marin hesitated. "The Dowager rises at 10 precisely." There was something in the girl's voice. A warning, perhaps. The storm was coming. She had until 10 o'clock tomorrow to prepare for it. After Marin departed, Lavinia changed into the borrowed nightgown and climbed into the ridiculous, cloud-soft bed. The sheets smelled of lavender. The pillows cradled her head like gentle hands. She should have been too anxious to sleep. Should have lain awake for hours, cataloging every way this plan could fail. Instead, exhaustion dragged her under within minutes. Her last thought before sleep claimed her was of the Duke's gray eyes, assessing and unreadable. "Tomorrow will be eventful," he'd said. She had a feeling that was an understatement. Morning arrived with pale sunlight and the quiet efficiency of invisible servants. Lavinia woke to find fresh flowers on her nightstand, white roses and trailing ivy, and a dress laid out across the settee. It was a morning gown of soft sage green, simply cut, but exquisitely made, with pearl buttons and delicate lacework at the collar. Marin appeared moments later. "Lady Phoebe had it sent from the modiste early this morning," she explained, helping Lavinia dress. "She said you'd need something suitable until your new wardrobe arrives." "My new wardrobe?" "Madame Celeste is coming this afternoon for measurements. Lady Phoebe has already placed an extensive order." Marin's reflection smiled at her in the mirror. "You're to be very well outfitted, miss." Lavinia didn't know whether to feel grateful or alarmed. An entire wardrobe, commissioned in a single morning, without any input from her. Breakfast was served in a sunny morning room, where Phoebe held court with boundless energy, pushing pastries onto Lavinia's plate while outlining the day's agenda. "Madame Celeste at 2. Dancing master at 4. Don't look like that. It's not optional. The Hartwell ball is in 6 days. Then dinner at 7, and we must discuss strategy for meeting grandmother." "Strategy?" Lavinia repeated weakly. "Oh, yes. She'll try to intimidate you. That's her way. The key is not to show fear, or, if you must show fear, show it interestingly. She respects spine." The Duke was absent from breakfast. "He takes his in the study," Phoebe explained, "buried in estate papers." At precisely 10 o'clock, a footman appeared in the doorway. "The Dowager Duchess requests Miss Castellan's presence in the East drawing room." Phoebe grabbed her hand beneath the table, squeezing hard. "Remember, spine." Lavinia rose on legs that felt carved from wood and followed the footman through a maze of corridors. Her borrowed slippers made no sound on the thick carpets. Her pulse thundered loud enough to echo off the walls. The East drawing room was smaller than she'd expected, intimate almost, with damask wallpaper, the color of old blood, and heavy velvet curtains blocking most natural light. A fire burned in the grate despite the mild spring weather, and before it sat the Dowager Duchess of Ashworth. She was not at all what Lavinia had imagined. Instead of a frail, elderly woman, The dowager was straight-backed and sharp-eyed, with steel-gray hair arranged in an elaborate style, and a face that might have been beautiful once, before time and loss carved it into something harder. She wore black, deep, unrelenting mourning black, but made it look like armor rather than grief. Sapphires glittered at her throat, cold as her gaze. "So," the dowager's voice carried across the room like a blade. "You're the young woman who fell asleep on my grandson's shoulder." Lavinia curtsied. "Your Grace, I apologize for the unconventional introduction." "Unconventional?" The dowager's lips curved, not quite a smile. "That's certainly a word for it." She gestured to a chair opposite her own. "Sit." Lavinia sat. For a long moment, the dowager simply studied her. Those sharp eyes catalogued everything: the borrowed dress, the hastily arranged hair, the slight tremor in Lavinia's hands. "My granddaughter tells me you're a friend from Bath," out before Lavinia could stop them. She out before Lavinia could stop them. She saw surprise flicker across the dowager's face. Surprise and reluctant interest. "You admit it's a fabrication. Would you prefer I lie to you?" The silence that followed was absolute. Lavinia could hear the fire crackling, the distant tick of a clock, the thunder of her own pulse. Then the dowager laughed. It was not a warm sound, more the sharp bark of someone who had forgotten how genuine amusement felt. But it was real. "I like you," she declared. "You have spine. Foolish spine, perhaps, but spine nonetheless." Her eyes narrowed. "My grandson hired you to disrupt my plans for Lady Clarissa. Don't bother denying it. I've already extracted the truth from that wretched Mr. Locke." Lavinia's stomach lurched. "I don't care about the scheme." The dowager waved a dismissive hand. "Hadrian is as stubborn as his father was. If he doesn't want to marry Lady Clarissa, he won't, no matter how many dinner parties I arrange. What I care about is whether you understand what you've stepped into." She leaned forward, and the firelight caught the sapphires at her throat, making them burn. "Tell me who you really are, Miss Castellan. The truth this time." There was no point in maintaining the pretense. Lavinia clasped her hands in her lap and told the truth. She spoke of her father's import business, profitable for 20 years, until a trusted partner absconded with their entire inventory. Of the house sold to pay debts, the servants dismissed, the slow descent into genteel poverty. She told of her mother's quiet strength, taking in sewing to keep them fed, of Oliver's endless schemes, of the education her parents had sacrificed everything to provide, because they'd believed their daughter deserved more than they could give. "I was supposed to make an advantageous match," Lavinia said. "Before the money disappeared, there was talk of a season. Instead, I learned to mend my own stockings and make soup from bones." She finished, and silence fell between them. The dowager rose, moving to the window. "You're poor, gently bred, but impoverished. No connections, no fortune, and no prospects beyond whatever position you might secure as a governess." She turned. "And my grandson offered you a fantasy, a few months of luxury in exchange for play acting as his potential bride." "That's an accurate summary, Your Grace." "Let me tell you what will happen. You'll spend the next 3 months at balls and parties, wearing beautiful gowns. Hadrian will be attentive in public and distant in private. That's who he is. Guarded, restrained, emotionally unavailable since his father's death." She moved closer, and Lavinia resisted the urge to shrink back. "You'll start to believe the fantasy. You'll start to hope that perhaps it could become real. I'm not naive enough to confuse performance with reality. Everyone is that naive when the performance is convincing enough." The dowager stopped directly before her chair, close enough that Lavinia could smell her perfume, rose and amber. "My concern is not for you. You'll survive. You're clever and adaptable, and my granddaughter will ensure you land on your feet. My concern is for Hadrian." This was not what Lavinia expected. "Your Grace? My son died 8 months ago." The dowager's voice held no emotion, but her hands, clasped at her waist, were white-knuckled. "A riding accident. The horse spooked and threw him. Hadrian was in Scotland. He rode through the night when the message reached him, nearly killed his own horse getting here. But he was too late. By the time he arrived, his father was already cold." Lavinia's throat tightened. "He hasn't been the same since. Goes through the motions, parliament, estate business, social obligations. But he's somewhere else, performing his duties without actually inhabiting them." The dowager's gaze burned into hers. "I want him to marry, not because it's his duty. I want him to live again, to feel something beyond grief." "Then why Lady Clarissa?" Lavinia asked. "If you want him to feel something." "Because feeling nothing seemed better than feeling pain." The admission seemed torn from the dowager against her will. "Clarissa is suitable, boring but safe. She would never challenge him, never force him to engage." "That sounds more like a tomb than a marriage." The words hung in the air. Lavinia braced for fury, for dismissal. Instead, the dowager smiled. A real smile, small and sad, and unexpectedly human. "It does, doesn't it?" She returned to her chair. "You, Miss Castellan, are a disruption, an unknown variable. You might bore him just as thoroughly as Clarissa would, or you might surprise me. I'm not trying to trap your grandson into marriage. This is a business arrangement, nothing more. We'll see." The dowager picked up a small silver bell and rang it once. "In the meantime, I have one warning. If you hurt him, if you manipulate his grief, or try to exploit his vulnerability, I will destroy you. Do we understand each other?" "Perfectly, Your Grace." A footman appeared in the doorway. "Miss Castellan and I have concluded our conversation. She'll be joining the family for dinner this evening." Lavinia rose. She was almost to the door when the dowager spoke again. "Miss Castellan." She turned. The old woman was watching her with an expression Lavinia couldn't quite read, something between assessment and reluctant hope. "Don't let him retreat into his ledgers. He's been hiding in numbers for 8 months. He needs someone who refuses to be ignored." It was not permission. It was not blessing. But it was, perhaps, a door left slightly ajar. Lavinia nodded once and escaped into the corridor, where she leaned against the wall and tried to remember how to breathe. The days that followed passed in a whirlwind of silk and instruction. Madame Celeste arrived with an army of assistants and transformed the blue guest suite into a temporary atelier. Lavinia was measured, pinned, draped, and turned until she felt less like a person and more like a dressmaker's mannequin. "The rose silk for the Hartwell ball," Phoebe declared. "It makes her complexion glow." "And the midnight velvet for the Sinclair musicale," Madame Celeste agreed. "Very dramatic, very memorable." No one asked Lavinia's opinion. The dancing master, a terrifying Prussian gentleman named Herr Kaufmann, arrived at 4 precisely and spent 2 hours shouting about posture and timing. "No, no, no!" He clapped his hands, his mustache quivering with indignation. "You are counting. The waltz is not mathematics, Miss Castellan. It is feeling. You must surrender to the music." Lavinia did not surrender. Lavinia grimly survived, emerging from each lesson with sore feet and bruised dignity. Through it all, the Duke remained conspicuously absent. She caught glimpses of him occasionally, a tall figure striding through a corridor, a voice carrying from behind a closed study door. But he never sought her out. At meals, when he appeared at all, he was distantly polite, inquiring about her comfort with the formal courtesy of a host addressing any houseguest. It shouldn't have bothered her. This was a business arrangement. but it did bother her, more than she wanted to admit. "He's always like this," Phoebe said on the 5th day, catching Lavinia watching the door yet again during afternoon tea. "Since Father died. Present, but not present. Else did she say? That she wants him to else did she say? That she wants him to live again. That she's afraid he's buried himself so deep in duty that he's forgotten how to be human. That sounds like grandmother, blunt as a hammer but usually accurate." Phoebe set down her teacup. "She likes you, by the way. Don't let the threats fool you. She only threatens people she respects." That evening, Lavinia found herself restless. Dinner had been another exercise in careful courtesy. Afterward, she had retreated to her suite, but sleep refused to come. At midnight, she gave up trying. She wrapped herself in a borrowed dressing gown and slipped into the corridor, intending to find the library. A book would help. A book always helped. The house was different at night. Shadows pooled in corners. Candles burned low in their sconces, casting wavering light across ancestral portraits. Her bare feet made no sound on the thick carpets as she navigated the unfamiliar hallways. Second corridor on the left. Third door past the portrait of the disapproving ancestor with the enormous nose. She found it eventually. A heavy oak door, slightly ajar, with firelight flickering through the gap. Lavinia pushed it open and stopped. The Duke was there. He sat in a leather chair before the dying fire, a glass of something amber in his hand. His coat had been discarded, his cravat loosened, his dark hair disheveled, as if he'd been running his fingers through it. He looked younger like this, less controlled, more human. He also looked exhausted. "Miss Castellan." His voice was rough, surprised. "I didn't expect. I couldn't sleep," she said quickly. "I was looking for a book. I can leave." "No." He set down his glass and stood. "Stay, please." The last word cost him something. Lavinia stepped into the room, letting the door swing closed. The library was magnificent. Floor-to-ceiling shelves crammed with leather-bound volumes, a wheeled ladder for reaching the highest shelves, comfortable chairs before the hearth. It smelled of paper and wood smoke and sandalwood. "You shouldn't be wandering the house alone at this hour," the Duke said. But there was no censure in his voice, only observation. "And you shouldn't be drinking alone in the dark." She moved toward the shelves, trailing her fingers along the spines. "Phoebe says you've been hiding in your study for months, burying yourself in estate business rather than facing whatever you're avoiding. Phoebe talks too much. Phoebe loves you. She's worried." The silence that followed was different from the careful silences at dinner. Heavier. More honest. "My father built this collection," the Duke said finally. "Spent 40 years filling these shelves. History, philosophy, poetry. He loved them all. He used to say books were the only company that never disappointed him. That sounds lonely. It was. For him, and for those of us who loved him." He moved to stand beside her at the shelves. "After my mother died, he retreated into these books, into the estate, into anything that didn't require him to feel. I watched him disappear inch by inch for 20 years, and I swore I would never do the same. And yet, here you are," Lavinia said softly, "hiding in a library at midnight." His jaw tightened. "Here I am." She should leave. She should return to her room, and remember, this was a business arrangement. Instead, she asked, "What was he like, your father?" The Duke was silent for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, brilliant, distant, kind in unexpected ways. "He never recovered from my mother's death. She was everything to him. When she died giving birth to Phoebe, something in him died too. He performed his duties, raised his children, but he was never fully present. I'm sorry. Are you? Or is that just what one says?" Lavinia considered. My father lost everything he built over 20 years in a single day. A partner he trusted betrayed him, and our entire world collapsed. He came home and told us we would have to sell the house, dismiss the servants. He apologized for failing us, stood in our parlor, and begged our forgiveness, as if the betrayal had been his fault. She paused, remembering. Something broke in him that day. He's never been the same. So, yes, Your Grace, I understand loss. I understand watching someone you love disappear into grief, and I am genuinely sorry for yours. The silence between them shifted, became something else. I didn't mean to snap at you, the Duke said finally. Yes, you did. But I understand. A ghost of amusement crossed his face. You're very direct, Miss Castellan. Lavinia, if we're going to spend 3 months pretending to court, you should probably use my Christian name. Lavinia, then. He said it slowly, testing the weight of it. And you must call me Hadrian, at least in private. Hadrian. She tried it. It suits you. Roman. Commanding. My mother chose it. She had a passion for classical history. He reached past her, his arm brushing her shoulder, and pulled a small object from the shelf. Not a book, but a box. Wooden, intricately carved, small enough to fit in his palm. This was hers. He wound something on the side, and music began to play. A simple melody, delicate and haunting, like a lullaby half-remembered from childhood. A music box, Lavinia breathed. She used to play it for us when we couldn't sleep. Phoebe was too young to remember, but He stopped, and for a moment, his control cracked. Pain flickered across his features. I remember. The melody wound down, the last notes fading into silence. You should have it, he said. What? No. I couldn't possibly. It's been sitting on this shelf for 20 years, gathering dust. No one plays it. No one remembers what it meant. He pressed it into her hands, his fingers warm against hers. Perhaps it deserves to be heard again. Lavinia looked down at the box, then up at his face. He was watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read, vulnerable almost. Why are you giving this to me? I don't know. The honesty surprised even him. Because you're the first person in 8 months who's looked at me like I'm a man instead of a title. Because you told me the truth when lying would have been easier. Because he stepped back. Because I wanted to. 3 words. Simple. Devastating. Lavinia clutched the music box to her chest, her pulse quickening. The Hartwell ball is tomorrow, Hadrian said, his voice carefully neutral again. We should discuss expectations. You'll be introduced as Phoebe's friend. I'll ask you to dance the first waltz and the supper dance. We'll be seen in conversation throughout the evening, enough to suggest interest, but not so much as to be scandalous. And Lady Clarissa? We'll be there. His jaw tightened. You'll likely face questions, possibly rudeness. I can handle rudeness. Can you? He moved toward the door, then paused. Society can be cruel, Lavinia, especially to those it perceives as overreaching. You'll be judged on every word, every gesture. One misstep, and they'll tear you apart. Then I won't misstep. Such confidence. Such necessity. She lifted her chin. I can't afford doubt, Your Grace. I agreed to this arrangement, and I'll see it through. He studied her for a long moment, and she had the strange sensation of being truly seen. Get some sleep, he said finally. Tomorrow will be eventful. Then he was gone, leaving her alone in the fire-lit library with a music box pressed against her heart and the echo of a melody she couldn't forget. The Hartwell ball was everything Lavinia had ever imagined and nothing she had prepared for. The townhouse blazed with 1,000 candles, their light reflected in crystal chandeliers and gilded mirrors until the entire building seemed to glow. Carriages lined the street for blocks, disgorging lords and ladies in silks and jewels that could have fed entire villages for years. Lavinia stood at the entrance to the ballroom, her pulse racing against the stays of her new corset, and tried to remember how to breathe. The rose silk gown Madame Celeste had created fit her like it had been sewn onto her body. Her hair had been arranged by Marin into an elaborate style, threaded with seed pearls, and borrowed diamonds, the dowagers, glittered at her throat and ears. She looked, for the first time in her life, like she belonged. She did not feel like she belonged. "Steady," Hadrian murmured beside her, his hand coming to rest at the small of her back. The touch was light, proper, and it sent electricity crackling through her body. "Remember, you're here as my sister's friend. You have every right to be present." "Easy for you to say," she whispered. "You've been attending these events since infancy. And I've loathed every single one." Something almost like humor flickered in his gray eyes. "At least tonight I have interesting company." Before she could respond, they were announced. His Grace, the Duke of Ashworth, Lady Phoebe Vance, Miss Lavinia Castellan. Every head in the ballroom turned. Lavinia felt the weight of hundreds of gazes, curious, assessing, hostile, pressing against her like a physical force. At the far end of the room, she spotted Lady Clarissa in ice blue silk, her expression frozen between shock and fury. "You can do this," she told herself. 3 months. Just 3 months. Phoebe squeezed her arm. "Smile like you have a secret. It drives them absolutely mad." So Lavinia smiled, mysterious and composed, and let the Duke lead her into the glittering chaos. The first hour passed in a blur of introductions. Lord this, Lady that, the Countess of somewhere, the Viscount of elsewhere. Lavinia smiled and curtsied, and made appropriate responses. Phoebe stayed close, whispering helpful context. "That's Mrs. Whitfield Hale. Terrible gossip, but influential. Compliment her dog, and she'll adore you forever. Lord Ashby, harmless flirt. Smile, but don't encourage. The Barrington sisters, vicious individually, lethal together. Avoid at all costs." Through it all, Hadrian remained a steady presence at her side. When a particularly persistent Viscount began monopolizing her attention, Hadrian materialized with a smooth excuse about promised introductions. When an elderly countess subjected her to an interrogation about her family connections, Hadrian redirected the conversation with practiced ease. It should have felt like performance. It didn't. When the orchestra struck up a waltz, Hadrian turned to her with formal correctness and extended his hand. "I believe this is ours, Miss Castellan." The room held its breath as she placed her gloved fingers in his. They took the floor together, and Lavinia felt the pressure of hundreds of watching eyes. She thought of Herr Kaufmann's shouted instructions, "Feel the music, stop thinking," of her countless stumbles during practice, of every reason she had to be terrified. Then Hadrian's hand settled at her waist, and the rest of the world fell away. "Don't think," he said quietly as they began to move. "Don't count. Just follow. The last time a man told me that, I stepped on his foot so hard he limped for a week. Then I'll consider myself warned." But she didn't step on his foot, didn't stumble. Herr Kaufmann would have wept with joy. The waltz that had defeated her in practice came alive under Hadrian's lead, and she found herself moving with grace she hadn't known she possessed. "You're staring at me," she murmured. "You're beautiful tonight." The words came out rough, unguarded. "I didn't expect," he stopped himself. "You're dancing very well. High praise from a duke. From this duke, it's practically a sonnet." She laughed, genuine, surprised, and saw wonder flicker in his eyes. The waltz ended too soon. He released her with careful propriety, bowing over her hand. Thank you for the dance, Miss Castellan. The pleasure was mine. Your Grace. They were performing, playing their roles. So why did it feel like something else entirely? The next hour brought more dancing. A quadrille with a pleasant young baron, a country dance with Phoebe, and a group of friendly young ladies. Lavinia began to relax, began to believe she might survive this evening unscathed. She should have known better. Lady Clarissa found her during a lull between dances, appearing at her elbow with striking precision. Miss Castellan. Her smile was all teeth, no warmth. What a delightful surprise to see you here. I hardly recognized you without the Duke's shoulder to sleep on. Heat flooded Lavinia's face, but she kept her voice steady. Lady Clarissa, what a lovely gown. Blue is certainly a color you wear frequently. The barb landed. Clarissa's eyes narrowed. I wanted to offer some friendly advice, woman to woman. How thoughtful. The Duke is playing a game, Miss Castellan. Clarissa leaned closer. Her perfume. Clarissa leaned closer, her perfume cloying. When his little rebellion is finished, he'll come back to where he belongs, and you'll go back to wherever it is you came from. Lavinia's hands trembled, but she refused to look away. And if he doesn't? Come back, I mean. Oh, he will, because that's how this world works. We marry our own kind. We preserve our bloodlines, protect our fortunes, and maintain the natural order. You're a pleasant diversion, but you'll never be one of us. She glided away before Lavinia could respond, leaving poison in her wake. The words shouldn't have hurt. They were nothing Lavinia hadn't told herself 100 times. But hearing them spoken aloud, with such casual cruelty, she needed air. She slipped through the French doors onto a stone terrace overlooking the gardens. The night air was cool against her flushed skin. Music drifted through the open doors, but out here it was muted, dreamlike. She was not alone for long. I saw Clarissa corner you. Hadrian appeared beside her, his expression tight with concern. What did she say? Nothing I didn't already know. Lavinia kept her gaze fixed on the darkened gardens. That I'm temporary, that I don't belong, that when you're finished with your rebellion, you'll return to your proper place and I'll return to mine. She's wrong. Is she? The question came out sharper than intended. This is a game, Your Grace. You said so yourself. In 3 months it ends. I go back to being no one, and you marry Lady Clarissa, or someone like her. Someone suitable. I don't want Lady Clarissa. What you want doesn't matter. Not really. Hadrian moved to stand beside her at the stone balustrade, close enough that she could feel his warmth, but not touching. My grandmother spent 20 years watching my father mourn my mother. She believes she's protecting me by pushing me toward Clarissa. A safe match, a bloodless arrangement. Isn't that what dukes do? Make bloodless arrangements? It's what we're supposed to do. His voice dropped, rough and uneven. It's not what I want. Lavinia turned to face him. In the moonlight, his features were silvered, softened. The harsh control cracked just slightly. What do you want? She whispered. He didn't answer. Instead, he reached up, slowly, deliberately, and brushed a strand of hair from her face. His fingers lingered against her cheek, warm and gentle. I don't know anymore, he admitted. I thought I knew. I thought I wanted to be left alone, to grieve in peace, to never let anyone close enough to hurt me again. But then you fell asleep on my shoulder in an opera box, and suddenly, Your Grace? A footman's voice cut through the moment. The Dowager Duchess is asking for you. Hadrian's hand dropped. The mask slid back into place. Of course, he said, stepping away. Please tell my grandmother I'll attend her momentarily. The footman departed, and Hadrian turned back with something like regret in his eyes. I should go. Yes. Lavinia wrapped her arms around herself, cold despite the mild evening. You should. He hesitated, seemed about to say something more, then strode back into the ballroom without another word. Lavinia stayed on the terrace for a long time, watching the stars and trying to convince herself that the ache in her chest was nothing more than wounded pride. The days following the Hartwell ball were torture. Hadrian withdrew completely. He took breakfast in his study, departed for Parliament before Lavinia woke, and returned after she'd retired. When their paths did cross, he was distantly polite. His earlier warmth vanished behind walls of ice. Phoebe tried to fill the silence with plans and distractions. A fitting for more gowns, a visit to the lending library, a music call at the Thornbury residence. But Lavinia felt the distance between them like a physical wound. The music box sat on her nightstand, silent. She hadn't wound it since the night he'd given it to her. Hearing that melody alone felt like a betrayal. He does this, Phoebe said on the fourth day, finding Lavinia in the library with an unread book in her lap. Retreats when things get too close. Father was the same way. The Vance men feel everything too deeply, so they've learned to feel nothing at all. It doesn't matter. Lavinia kept her voice neutral. This is a business arrangement. His feelings aren't my concern. Liar. Phoebe dropped into the chair opposite her. I saw you dancing together at the Hartwell ball. I saw how he looked at you. That wasn't nothing. It was performance. For whom? No one was watching on that terrace. Lavinia had no response. The Thornbury Music Hall arrived on Thursday evening, and Lavinia dressed in midnight velvet. Her hair was arranged simply, and she wore only the small gold locket her mother had given her. The Thornbury residence was smaller, the gathering more intimate. Perhaps 50 guests, rather than 500. The evening's entertainment was Mozart and Handel, performed by a talented soprano and string quartet. Lavinia found a seat near the back of the music room, hoping to avoid attention. She did not succeed. Miss Castellan, Hadrian appeared at her side. May I sit? She nodded, not trusting her voice. He settled beside her, close enough that their shoulders nearly touched. The quartet began to play, something melancholy and beautiful, and neither of them spoke. I owe you an apology, he said finally, voice low enough that only she could hear. For what specifically? The list seems extensive. A huff of breath that might have been a laugh. For avoiding you, for being cold, for being afraid. Lavinia turned to look at him. In the candlelight, his features were all sharp angles and shadows, but his eyes were open in a way she hadn't seen before. Vulnerable. Afraid of what? Of this. Of you. Of whatever is happening between us that I don't have words to name. His hand, resting on his thigh, twitched as if he wanted to reach for her, but didn't dare. I was supposed to remain detached. You were supposed to be a convenient solution. Instead, I find myself thinking about you constantly, wondering if you're smiling, wondering if you're thinking about me. The music swelled around them, achingly beautiful. I think about you, Lavinia admitted, the words barely audible. More than I should. More than is wise. Nothing about this situation is wise. No, it isn't. When the musical concluded, Hadrian leaned close. Come to the library tonight, after everyone has retired. There's something I need to tell you. That's inappropriate, reckless, potentially disastrous. His eyes held hers, dark and intense. I know. Come anyway. He stood and walked away before she could respond. At 11:30, she wrapped herself in her dressing gown and slipped into the darkened corridors. The library door was ajar, firelight flickering through the gap. She pushed it open and found Hadrian before the hearth, his coat discarded, his waistcoat unbuttoned, his cravat hanging loose. He looked undone. You came, he said, relief flooding his voice. You asked. I didn't think you would. After everything. After how I've behaved. You were afraid." Lavinia moved into the room, letting the door swing closed. "I understand fear. Do you?" He crossed to her in 3 long strides, stopping close enough that she could see the rapid pulse at his throat. "Do you understand what it means to lose everyone you've ever loved? My mother before I was old enough to remember her properly. My father, slowly, over 20 years of grief. My grandmother is all I have left. I'm surrounded by people, Lavinia, and I have never felt more alone. You have Phoebe. Phoebe deserves better than a brother who can barely function, who buries himself in ledgers because numbers don't hurt, who flinches from affection because every time he lets someone close, they leave." His voice cracked. "I can't do this. I can't let myself want something I'm destined to lose. Then why did you ask me here?" "Because I'm tired." The confession seemed torn from him. Tired of performing, tired of pretending, tired of being so bloody guarded all the time. His hands came up to cup her face, trembling slightly. "Because when I'm with you, I forget to be afraid. And that terrifies me more than anything." "Then stop being afraid," she whispered. "Just for tonight. Stop being the Duke of Ashworth. Stop being controlled and proper. Just be Hadrian. Just be here. With me." He kissed her. It was not gentle. It was the kiss of a man who had been holding himself back for weeks, for years, and had finally let go. His mouth claimed hers with desperate intensity, his hands tangling in her loose hair, pulling her closer until there was no space between them. Lavinia kissed him back with equal abandon. She forgot about propriety, about consequences. She forgot everything except the taste of him, the feel of him, the overwhelming rightness of being exactly where she was. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, his forehead rested against hers. "I love you," he said, the words rough with wonder. "God help me. I love you. I've been trying not to for weeks, but I can't stop." Tears pricked her eyes. "This is madness." "I know. It can't work. Society won't accept it. Your grandmother will never—" "I don't care." His grip tightened. "I've spent my entire life doing what was expected, and it made my father miserable. It killed him as surely as that fall from his horse." His voice shook. "I won't live that way. Not anymore. Hadrian, tell me you don't feel this. Tell me this is just performance, just arrangement, and I'll walk away. I'll marry Clarissa, or whoever my grandmother chooses." He pulled back to look at her, his gray eyes blazing. "But if you feel even a fraction of what I feel—" "I love you," Lavinia said, because there was nothing else to say. "I've loved you since you gave me that music box. I love you, and it terrifies me, and I don't know how we possibly—" He kissed her again, swallowing the rest of her words, and for one perfect moment, nothing else mattered. The dream shattered 3 days later. Lavinia woke to sunshine and Marin's face, pale with anxiety. "The Dowager has requested your presence, miss, immediately." The words sent ice through her veins. She dressed quickly, her fingers fumbling with buttons, her mind racing. Had someone seen them? Had Clarissa discovered something? She found the Dowager in the breakfast room. Unusual, as the old woman rarely emerged before 10. Hadrian was there too, along with Phoebe, their faces arranged in expressions of neutrality. But it was the fourth person that made Lavinia's heart stop. Lady Clarissa Pemberton, resplendent in morning silk, with a smile like a cat who had cornered prey. "Miss Castellan." The Dowager's voice was arctic. "Please, sit." Lavinia sat, hands clasped to hide their trembling. "Lady Clarissa has brought some interesting information to my attention, regarding your background. Your Grace, it seems your father's business partner did not merely make poor investments." Clarissa's voice dripped with false sympathy. He was arrested for fraud 3 years ago, transported to Australia, and your father was investigated as a potential accomplice. The room tilted. Lavinia gripped the arms of her chair. That's not. The investigation cleared him. He was a victim, not a participant. Perhaps. Perhaps not. Clarissa examined her gloves. The ton does so love a scandal, and the daughter of an accused fraudster, masquerading as a respectable gentlewoman in the Duke of Ashworth's household. She clicked her tongue. One can only imagine the whispers. That's enough. Hadrian's voice cut through the room. Miss Castellan's father was exonerated. The investigation found no wrongdoing. Exonerated is not the same as innocent, Your Grace. You know how society talks. I said enough. Silence fell. The dowager had been watching with narrowed eyes. Now she spoke with decades of authority. Lady Clarissa, thank you for bringing this matter to our attention. You may leave. But Your Grace, now. Clarissa's composure cracked, fury flashing, before she schooled her features and swept from the room. The door closed with a click that sounded like a cell door slamming. Now, the dowager said, turning to Lavinia. You will explain. Lavinia's throat was too tight for words. She looked at Hadrian, saw concern in his eyes. My father was innocent, she said, voice smaller than intended. He trusted the wrong man, his partner, of 15 years. And when that man's crimes were exposed, father was investigated, along with everyone connected to the business. The magistrates cleared him within a month. There was no evidence of wrongdoing, because there was no wrongdoing. And yet you didn't think to mention this investigation when we discussed your background. I didn't think it was relevant. He was cleared. You didn't think it was relevant. The dowager's voice rose. You are living in my house, pretending to court my grandson, and you didn't think it was relevant that your family has been touched by scandal. Grandmother, Hadrian began. Be silent. I will deal with you shortly. She turned back to Lavinia. Do you understand what you've done? Lady Clarissa will spread this story to everyone she knows. By evening, every drawing room in London will be buzzing with talk of the Duke of Ashworth's inappropriate attachment to the daughter of an accused criminal. He was exonerated. It doesn't matter. The dowager slammed her hand against the table. Truth doesn't matter in society. Perception is everything. And you have just made my grandson an object of ridicule and speculation. Lavinia's eyes burned, but she refused to cry. Not here. I never intended to cause harm. I hoped. You thought you could play at being something you're not. You hoped no one would look too closely. The dowager's voice was relentless. But someone always looks, Miss Castellan. Someone always finds the truth. That's not fair. Hadrian stepped forward, positioning himself between his grandmother and Lavinia. She's done nothing wrong. Her father's troubles are not her crimes. Her father's troubles are now our troubles, thanks to whatever foolishness has been occurring between you two. The silence that followed was devastating. Yes, the dowager continued, voice dropping. I'm not blind, Hadrian. I've seen the way you look at her, the way you've been disappearing to the library at odd hours. Did you think I wouldn't notice? Lavinia's face flamed. Beside her, Phoebe drew a sharp breath. What happens between Miss Castellan and me, Hadrian began. What happens affects this entire family, this title, generations of Vance honor and reputation. The dowager rose, spine straight, eyes blazing. I warned you, Miss Castellan. I told you what would happen if you hurt him. And now, because of your silence, my grandson faces public humiliation. I didn't deceive anyone. You allowed us to believe you were simply a merchant's daughter, fallen on hard times. You failed to mention that your family name carries the stain of criminal investigation. That is a lie of omission. And in this world, It is unforgivable." Lavinia stood, legs trembling, but voice steady. "Then I'll leave. I'll remove myself from your household, from your grandson's life. That's what you want, isn't it?" "Lavinia, no." Hadrian reached for her, but she stepped back. "Don't." The word came out broken. "She's right. I should never have agreed to this. Our." She fled before anyone could stop Our. She fled before anyone could stop her. Home had never felt so small. Lavinia stood in the doorway of her family's cramped lodgings, her single trunk at her feet, and felt something inside her collapse. The walls pressed in. The air smelled of cabbage and coal smoke and genteel poverty. After Ashworth House, this modest parlor felt like a coffin. Her mother emerged from the back room, wiping her hands on her apron, face creasing with surprise and concern. "Lavinia, what's happened? We didn't expect you for months. It ended." The words scraped her throat. "The position, it ended early." She couldn't tell her mother the truth, couldn't explain about dukes and fake courtships and kisses in fire-lit libraries. So she lied. Said the family had reduced their household. Said Lady Phoebe was traveling abroad. Said it was nothing, just an unfortunate change of circumstances. Her mother accepted the explanation with quiet resignation. Her father barely looked up from his chair by the cold fireplace. Oliver wasn't there, chasing another scheme, no doubt. Lavinia unpacked her trunk, hung her few dresses in a wardrobe too small to hold them properly, placed the music box on her nightstand, where it sat silent and accusing. She didn't wind it. She couldn't bear to hear that melody, not when it would only remind her of everything she had lost. The days blurred together. She helped her mother with mending, accompanied her to market, read to her father in the evenings, though he rarely seemed to hear. At night, she lay awake and tried not to think about gray eyes and midnight conversations and the way Hadrian's voice had sounded when he said, "I love you." He hadn't tried to contact her. No letters, no messages. No duke appearing at their modest door to declare that scandal be damned. Of course he hadn't. He was the Duke of Ashworth. He had duties, obligations, a family name to protect. She had been a fantasy, a pleasant diversion, just as Clarissa had said. And now, the fantasy was over. On the 7th day, Oliver came home. He found Lavinia in the parlor, staring at nothing, and immediately began pacing. "I heard what happened," he said. "Phineas told me about the investigation being discovered, about Lady Clarissa. I don't want to talk about it." "Lavinia," I said, "I don't want to talk about it." She turned to face him and saw him flinch at whatever he read in her expression. "It's over, Oliver. I was a fool to agree to it. And now, I'm paying the price. But if you just let me explain." "Explain what? How you sold me to a stranger for 3 guineas? How you promised it would be simple?" Her voice cracked. "I trusted you. I trusted your friend. And now—" She couldn't finish. Oliver's face crumpled. "I'm sorry. I never meant for any of this to happen. I thought it would help. That maybe you'd make connections, find a position. Well, I didn't." Lavinia stood, moving toward the door. "I fell in love instead, and now I get to spend the rest of my life remembering what it felt like to have everything and lose it in a single morning." She left him standing in the parlor and retreated to her room, where she finally allowed herself to cry. The knock came on the 10th day. Lavinia was helping her mother with washing, elbow deep in soapy water, her hair escaping its pins, when the sharp rap echoed through the small house. "I'll go," her mother said. "You're in no state for visitors." "We don't have visitors," Lavinia muttered, but she stepped back from the washtub, pushing damp hair from her face. She heard the door open, heard her mother's sharp intake of breath, heard a voice, familiar, impossible, say, "Mrs. Castellan, I apologize for the intrusion. I need to speak with your daughter." Lavinia's heart stopped. She moved to the parlor doorway and found Hadrian Vance, Duke of Ashworth, standing in her mother's cramped entrance hall. He was hatless, coatless, his cravat askew, and his dark hair windblown, as if he'd ridden hard. His gray eyes found hers immediately, and the desperation in them stole her breath. "Lavinia, you shouldn't be here. If anyone sees you, I don't care. Your reputation, I don't care." He crossed the room in 3 strides, stopping just short of touching her. "I've spent 10 days trying to care, trying to do the sensible thing, the proper thing. And I can't. I can't stop thinking about you. I can't sleep. I can't eat. Phoebe threatened to have me committed if I didn't come after you." Behind her, Lavinia heard her mother slip away, pulling the parlor door closed. "Your grandmother. My grandmother can go hang." The profanity sounded shocking from his aristocratic lips. "She was wrong, Lavinia. About you, about what matters, about everything. Your father's investigation was public record. We should have discovered it ourselves rather than waiting for Clarissa to weaponize it. That was our failure, not yours. But the scandal, there is no scandal." Hadrian's hands came up to cup her face. The story died within 2 days. When a duke publicly supports someone, society follows his lead. I made it clear that anyone who spoke ill of you or your family would find themselves unwelcome in any house I had influence over. Tears pricked her eyes. "You did that? I would have done more. I would have burned down every drawing room in London if that's what it took." His thumbs brushed her cheekbones, wiping away tears she hadn't realized she was shedding. "I love you. I told you that, and I meant it. I've been a coward and an idiot, but I'm not letting my fear cost me the only person who's made me feel alive in years. Hadrian, my grandmother has agreed to accept you. Phoebe threatened to elope with a chimney sweep if she didn't, which I'm fairly certain was a bluff, but it was effective regardless." A ghost of a smile crossed his face. "She said you reminded her of my mother. Fierce and foolish and absolutely certain. She said my mother would have liked you." The tears were falling freely now. "This is madness. Yes, society will never fully accept me. There will always be whispers. Let them whisper. Let them look." His forehead came to rest against hers. "I don't want their approval. I want you. In my library at midnight, arguing with me about poetry. At my breakfast table, making Phoebe laugh. In my life, Lavinia, for the rest of it." That sounds like a proposal. That's because it is one. He pulled back just far enough to meet her eyes. "Marry me. Not because of schemes or arrangements." Lavinia thought of everything she stood to gain by refusing to marry him. She was fairly certain that he loved her, and she was fairly certain that he would not be able to live without her. She was fairly certain that he would not be able to live without her. She was fairly certain that he would not be able to live without her. She was fairly certain that he would not be able to live without her. She was fairly certain that he would not be able to live without her. She was fairly certain that he would not be able to live without her. She was fairly certain that he would not be able to live without her. She was fairly certain that he would not be able to live without her. She was fairly certain that he would not be able to live without her. She was fairly certain that he would not be able to live without her. She was fairly certain that he would not be able to live without her. She was fairly certain that he would not be able to live without her. She was fairly certain that he would not be able to live without her. She was fairly certain that he would not be able to live without her. She was fairly certain that he would not be able to live without her. She was fairly certain that he would not be able to live without her. She was fairly certain that he would not be able to live without her. She was fairly certain that he would not be able to live without her. She was fairly certain that he would not be able to live without her. She was fairly certain that he would not be able to live without her. She was fairly certain that he would not be able to live without her. She was fairly certain that he would not be able to live without her. She was fairly certain that he would not be able to live without her. She was fairly certain that he would not be able to live without her. She was fairly certain that he would not be able to live without her. She was fairly certain that he would not be able to live without her. She was fairly certain that he would not be able to live without her. She was fairly certain that he would not be able to live without her. She was fairly certain that he would not be able to live without her. She was fairly certain that he would not be able to live without her. She was fairly certain that he would not be able to live without her. She was fairly certain that he would not be able to live without her. She was fairly certain that he would not be able to live without her. She was fairly certain that he would not be able to live without her. She was fairly certain that he would not be able to live without her. She was fairly certain that he would not be able to live without her. She was fairly certain that he would not be able to live without her. She was fairly certain that he would not be able. Lavinia thought of everything she stood to lose. The security of invisibility, the safety of low expectations. Then she thought of everything she stood to gain. "Yes," she said. Hadrian's face transformed. The walls he had built crumbled, leaving only joy. He kissed her, and it tasted like coming home. The Sinclair Ball was the event of the season. Everyone who mattered was there, and everyone had heard the rumors. The Duke of Ashworth was bringing his mysterious Miss Castellan. The Dowager Duchess had given her blessing. Lady Clarissa Pemberton had been notably absent from society events for 2 weeks. Lavinia stood at the top of the grand staircase in a gown of ivory silk embroidered with gold thread, the Ashworth diamonds blazing at her throat. Real ones this time, not borrowed. A gift from the Dowager herself, presented with gruff words about family heirlooms requiring proper custodians. "Ready?" Hadrian asked beside her, devastatingly handsome in formal evening wear. "No, absolutely not." "Good. Neither am I." He offered his arm. "Shall we terrify society together?" They descended the stairs as one, and the ballroom fell silent. Lavinia felt the weight of hundreds of gazes, curious, judgmental, envious, admiring. She saw matrons who had once dismissed her, now reassessing, recalculating. The Duke of Ashworth had chosen. Society would simply have to accept it. The orchestra struck up a waltz, the same waltz they had danced at the Hartwell Ball, when everything had been performance. But this time, when Hadrian led her onto the floor, there was nothing fake about it. "Everyone is staring," she murmured. "Let them." His hand tightened at her waist. "I want them to see. I want them all to know that I found something extraordinary in the most unexpected place, and I was smart enough not to let it go." Flatterer. Truth-teller. He spun her through a turn, and she laughed. "I love you, Lavinia Castellan. I'm going to spend the rest of my life making sure you never doubt it." The waltz ended. The applause began. And Hadrian dropped to one knee in the middle of the Sinclair ballroom, in front of everyone who had ever doubted, everyone who had ever judged, everyone who had ever whispered that the merchant's daughter could never belong. This was no private question asked in a cramped parlor. This was a declaration. Public. Undeniable. "Miss Lavinia Castellan," he said, voice carrying across the silent room. "You fell asleep on my shoulder at the opera and changed my entire life. You made me remember how to feel. You made me brave enough to choose happiness over expectation. Will you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" The ballroom held its breath. Lavinia looked down at this impossible, wonderful man who had looked at her sleeping form in an opera box and made a quiet decision that had changed everything. He could have woken her, could have sent her away, could have pretended nothing had happened. Instead, he had let society see them together, had set a story in motion that neither of them could have predicted. "Yes," she said, voice clear and strong. 1,000 times, yes. He rose and kissed her, right there in the middle of the ballroom, scandalous and perfect, and absolutely right. Later, much later, after the congratulations and the champagne, Lavinia found a moment alone in the Sinclair library. She wound the music box Hadrian had given her. She'd brought it, tucked into her reticule, and let the melody fill the quiet space. The door opened, and Hadrian slipped inside. "I thought I'd find you here." He crossed to stand beside her, wrapping an arm around her waist. Escaping the madness. Just remembering. She leaned against him, the music box still playing. "You gave me this the night everything changed. The night I started to believe this might be real. It was always real." He pressed a kiss to her temple. "I just needed you to help me see it." The music wound down, the last notes fading into silence. "Your mother would have liked this," Lavinia said softly. The music being heard again, the box being loved instead of gathering dust. "She would have liked you." Hadrian's voice was rough with emotion. "She would have loved that I found someone worth fighting for." They stood together in the fire-lit library, wrapped in each other's arms. It wasn't a fairy tale ending. There would still be challenges, still be whispers, still be moments when society's cruelty would sting. The Dowager would continue to be formidable. Phoebe would continue to be overwhelming. And Lavinia would always carry the marks of where she came from, but she would carry them proudly now. Not as shame, but as proof of survival, of resilience, of the strength it took to fall asleep on a stranger's shoulder and wake up to a completely different life. "What are you thinking?" Hadrian asked. "That I'm glad I was exhausted that night at the opera. That I'm glad I fell asleep. That I'm glad you made the decision you made." "What decision?" "Not to wake me." She turned in his arms, looking up at him with eyes bright with love. "You could have shaken me awake, sent me away, and pretended nothing had happened. Instead, you let me sleep. You let people see us together. You let the story begin." "Best decision I ever made," he said, and kissed her again. Outside, the ball continued. Society whirled and gossiped and began adjusting to the new Duchess of Ashworth. But inside the library, wrapped in firelight and music and each other, Hadrian and Lavinia were already home. And if, years later, they made a tradition of attending the opera together, and if, every single time Lavinia let herself drift to sleep against her husband's shoulder while the music played, well, some stories are worth repeating. Some decisions, made quietly in the dark, change everything. And some love is worth every risk it takes to find it. Thank you for being here. Your presence makes this story possible. If you enjoyed Lavinia and Hadrian's journey, consider subscribing for more tales of unexpected love and the courage it takes to reach for happiness. Your support means everything. Until next time, may you find your own quiet decisions that change everything.